So, what do a cunning fox, a Toyota factory, and your morning routine actually have in common? I know, it sounds exactly like the setup to a really strange joke, doesn't it? But there is actually a profound thread connecting these three incredibly different things. And if you're someone who is focused on efficient learning, you are absolutely going to love this. Because today, we're going to explore how massive, systematic transformations, whether we're talking about ancient kingdoms, global manufacturing, or just your own personal life, always begin with mastering the micro. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're synthesizing some truly fascinating concepts. We're going to look at the intersection of modern psychology, post-World War II manufacturing, and ancient folklore. Now, I know it might seem like a wild mix at first glance, but as you'll see, a beautiful logic emerges about how humans across time and across completely different cultures have used tiny, almost invisible units of change to achieve monumental results.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The power of small. 2. The 1% rule. 3. Kaizen, continuous system improvement. 4. Fables, micro stories, macro morals. 5. East meets West. And finally, 6. Systems over goals.
Section 1. The power of small. To kick things off, we really need to challenge a very common obsession we all seem to share, the obsession with massive overnight action. You know the feeling. We often think that to achieve a big goal, we have to make some enormous, disruptive change in our lives. But big goals are intimidating, right? They require this immense, exhausting amount of willpower. Well, the actual secret to enduring success isn't thinking big at all. It's about thinking as small as humanly possible.
Let's move to Section 2, the 1% rule. Let's see how this builds into the realm of modern personal development. Because to truly understand the power of small, we have to look at one of the most influential frameworks of the last decade. It was popularized by writer James Clear in his 2018 self-help book, Atomic Habits. His core thesis is pretty simple but powerful. The willpower needed to overcome a bad habit is best developed by slowly replacing it with a positive habit that requires almost zero exertion.
Just to give you a sense of exactly how much this concept resonated with people, nearly 20 million copies were sold by early 2024. That's a staggering number. The book sat on the New York Times bestseller list for an astounding 260 weeks. People everywhere were just desperate for a system that actually worked. Now, to be completely impartial here, it is definitely worth noting that not everyone is fully on board with it. Critics, like Stephen Phillips Horst, writing in The Guardian, have pushed back on the book. He characterized its grand theories on human behavior as pseudoscientific, arguing that books like this rely on circular logic and offer comforting, kind of feel-good versions of philosophy rather than rigorous, hard science. But regardless of the critique, the mechanics of Clare's system have undeniably been adopted by millions of people to structure their everyday lives.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Clear breaks down his famous habit loop. Basically, every single habit boils down to these 4 steps. Imagine you walk into a pitch-black room. The darkness, that's the cue. You crave the ability to see. Your response is reaching out and flipping the light switch. And the reward is clear vision. Clear argues that by getting just 1% better each day, making tiny, almost unnoticeable tweaks to this loop, you break down massive psychological barriers into tiny, unexacting steps. You aren't changing everything, you're just tweaking the cue, or slightly adjusting the reward.
Section 3. Kaizen, continuous system improvement. Here is where our explainer takes a really fascinating turn. Because this idea of tweaking a system by 1%, it wasn't actually invented by a modern self-help author. To see its origins in the modern era, we have to seamlessly pivot from personal psychology over to global corporate manufacturing. We're taking a trip back to post-WW2 Japan.
And this brings us to Kaizen. It's a Japanese word combining Kai and Zen, literally meaning change for better. But in the business world, it became this overarching philosophy of making continuous, often trivial improvements across every single aspect of an operation. It actually originated from the work of American advisors helping with Japan's post-war recovery. Kaizen was then famously adopted into the legendary Toyota production system. And the sheer brilliance of it is that it requires participation from absolutely everyone. We aren't just talking about the CEO handing down massive corporate mandates. It's the assembly line worker noticing a tool is just slightly out of reach and deciding to move it 2 inches closer. It's about micro improvements every single day.
This perfectly mirrors a framework introduced to Japan by American statistician W. Edwards Deming, the PDCA cycle: plan, do, check, act. Notice the eerie parallel to the modern habit loop we just looked at? Both of these micromodels rely on taking a small action, getting continuous feedback, and making a quick behavioral adjustment. It's the exact same systemic thinking. It's just being applied to a bustling factory floor instead of your morning routine.
And this brilliantly illustrates what Kaizen is constantly hunting for, what they call muda, or waste. There are 7 types of waste it ruthlessly aims to eliminate from the system. Things like overproduction, waiting around with inactive hands, moving materials unnecessarily, producing faulty parts, excessive storage and inventory, awkward movements that cause physical fatigue, and unfavorable processing. By making trivial, daily tweaks to eliminate these micro-wastes, you optimize the entire overarching macro system. You don't rebuild the factory from scratch, you just eliminate the tiny inefficiencies.
Section 4. Fables, Micro-Stories, Macro-Morals. All right, let's pivot again, this time all the way back to the ancient world. Because using small things to grasp big concepts isn't just a modern invention of productivity experts or car manufacturers. Nope, storytellers and sages figured this out thousands of years ago.
If you look at academic analysis of ancient literature, it shows that civilizations used brief, incredibly simple animal fables as micro-stories to teach macro-level political diplomacy and moral ethics. Think about it. Instead of writing a massive, complicated philosophical treatise on human nature that nobody is going to read, they distilled it down to a quick, short interaction between a couple of animals. It's essentially the ultimate form of a micro-lesson designed to bypass human psychological barriers and teach us how to behave.
Ancient storytellers personified animals with very specific, static traits to create these early, universal versions of behavioral programming. A fox? Always cunning. A donkey represents foolishness. A dog is fidelity. A lion is power and strength. Because humans are complicated and our real motives are super hard to read, fablists just mapped human virtues and vices directly onto these animals. When you read a fable, you instantly understand the variables at play. It's an efficient, tiny module of learning that leaves a lasting imprint on the human mind.
Section 5. East meets West. This brings us to a fascinating cross-cultural comparison. Just as we saw continuous improvement theories jump from the West to the East and back again, we see the exact same pattern in ancient folklore. Let's look at 2 foundational texts, ancient Greece's Aesop's Fables and ancient India's Panchatantra.
Let's actually map this out on a timeline. Around 620 BC, Aesop's Fables originate in Greece. By the 3rd century BCE, the Panchatantra is compiled in India. Fast forward thousands of years to 1947, Deming brings his statistical control methods to Japan, birthing Kaizen. And then in 2018, Atomic Habits is published. Visualizing this progression really shows us that this human obsession with using micro-units of change, whether it's a tiny story or a tiny habit, spans thousands of years and vast geographic divides. It's like this universal human operating system.
Yet, despite being geographically separated, the mechanics were practically identical, even if their origins were wildly different. In the West, Aesop is believed to have been a slave, using his power of speech and simple stories to subtly mock his owners, survive day to day, and provide political allegory without getting punished for it. Meanwhile, in the East, the Panchatantra was created by a scholar named Vishnu Sharma. As the story goes, a king had 3 dull-witted sons, Vasusakti, Ugrasakti, and Anexakti, who just couldn't grasp complex scriptures. So Sharma used entertaining, interwoven animal fables to teach these princes diplomacy, politics, and the wise conduct of life, all in just 6 months. The microstory was utilized by a slave for survival and by a scholar for systemic royal education.
Section 6. Systems over goals. So how do we bring all 3 of these totally distinct historical and cultural topics together? What exactly is the grand unified theory connecting modern psychology, a Japanese manufacturing philosophy, and ancient animal literature? Well, it all comes down to one powerful concept: systems over goals.
So the crucial point here is captured beautifully in this quote from James Clear. The goal isn't to run a marathon, it's to become a runner. True transformation doesn't happen just because you cross the finish line of a one-off goal. It happens at the identity layer. It happens when you build an ongoing system. You don't just want to fix a broken part on an assembly line, you want to become a factory that inherently produces quality. You don't just want to act bravely once, you want to build a moral framework that literally makes you a brave person.
Which perfectly brings us to our core thesis today. Kaizen uses tiny improvements to build a resilient, efficient corporate system. Fables use tiny stories to build an enduring moral system in our minds. And Atomic Habits use tiny behavioral tweaks to build a resilient personal system. They all completely bypass the overwhelming intimidation of massive change by focusing entirely on the micro. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. You've seen how empires, global factories, and regular individuals have leveraged the power of the tiny. You understand the profound, underlying mechanics of the micro. So, applying this ancient and modern wisdom right now in your own life. What is the 1% improvement you can make to your own personal factory today? Think about that small, trivial tweak you can make right this second. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparks some curiosity for you, and I will catch you next time.